Hey, Whiskey Network and WBSE, it's Mark Pruett, and I have an exciting interview to share with you. I am on a quest to connect with other whiskey enthusiasts who do interesting things and have great stories to share. I love to connect those stories and experiences back to whiskey and bring them to you. Today, I am talking to Charley Boorman. He is a whiskey enthusiast who is also a star of motion pictures and television, a modern-day adventurer, a motorcycle enthusiast, and an author. His amazing adventures have been chronicled through several TV series. His best friend is Ewan McGregor, and they have been making memories and sharing them with the world through the Long Way series. Most recently, the third installment of their adventures, called The Long Way Up, debuted on Apple TV+. At the heart of this series are the experiences of these two friends who love long-distance motorcycle adventures. It has become a cultural touchstone where viewers can experience the highs and lows of traveling off the beaten path. Best of all, he discusses his personal love of whiskey, and he offers up some fun whiskey-related stories. Whether you are a rider, someone who enjoys travel, or a person who loves good stories, there is a lot to dig into here. So pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, bourbon, or scotch, settle in and get comfortable. Please visit thewhiskeynetwork.net for more about my interview with Charley, and don't forget to subscribe for all things whiskey. Thanks, and cheers. Well, Charley, thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, that's fine. My pleasure.
So, listen, before we jump into speaking about Long Way Up, I wanted to ask a question. And, you know, obviously I'm a writer too, and I think we both share kind of that obsession.
Yeah.
Is there a dream motorcycle for you? What would be the dream?
I think, well, it would have to be my Harley Davidson Livewire. It would have to be. I think it's funny, you know, people talk about motorbikes and what kind of motorbikes you have, and I have quite a few bikes, and funny enough, you know, for the price of one really decent car, you could have 12 or 13 really nice motorcycles.
Absolutely.
So it does make it easier, and I don't know what it's like in the States. I think it's probably very similar to here, but that whole secondhand market is actually quite buoyant. It's you can get a lot for your money, and there's a lot out there. And people ask me, you know, what have you got in your garage, or what would you like, or something like that. And I've been lucky enough to be able to ride lots of different bikes, but I think there's a few regrets in my life, and not many of them are in my normal life, but a lot of them are in the bikes that I've had to give up in order to buy another one, you know. So I remember I crashed a GSX-R 750, wrote it off, and then in the meantime I bought an XR 600R Honda, which was a beautiful motorcycle.
Incredible motorcycle.
Incredible motorcycle, and quite iconic in many ways.
Absolutely.
And brutal, huge thing. Anyway, I absolutely love that. But I had to sell that to buy another GSX-R sports bike, and still to this day, I regret it. It was a one owner. I don't think he'd ever dropped it. I don't think it was really used much, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was very hard to start because it was a kickstart, big engine.
Oh yeah.
And the only way you could start it was by sneaking up behind it and jumping on top of it and kickstarting it really quick before it realized,
before it knew what was going on.
If you came to it forward facing, it would see you and it just wouldn't start. So I suppose I miss that, and I often think about that bike, and maybe I should just go get one, but they're hard to find.
I was going to say I'll keep an eye out for XRs in the trades.
Maybe one where someone has put an electric start on it, because apparently you can do that. So because that's an ankle breaker if I ever saw one.
I would agree. I think that you know, there just comes a point to where you grow beyond the Kickstarter.
Sure.
That's a great segue. Look, Long Way Up, 13,000 miles, 13 countries, border crossings, all done on electric Harley Davidson motorcycles. Obviously, they were modified, and then with the Rivian electric chase trucks. You know, I think the legacy of Long Way Up is probably still very young and maybe a little misunderstood as far as the electric perspective. What do you think about that? What do you think the legacy is going to evolve to?
Well, I think always with anything new, there's always a little bit of resistance, um, and it's interesting because when we're going along, I think one of the things when we finally got the bikes and the vehicles down to Ushuaia in South Argentina, we, you and I had realized we'd only ridden them for about 2 hours in total, and
Yeah.
had never really charged them really, and so there was a lot to learn about them, and plus the fact it was the worst winter in 30 years down there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was super cold, which doesn't help doesn't help batteries so much. So you get less range out of them. Mm-hmm. So we were starting really at the worst point for an electric vehicle. So those first few weeks were really difficult, very frustrating, a big learning curve. And I think, like all things with new stuff, and plus the fact we'd realized that we were doing this trip and there were no fast chargers. We put in this infrastructure in phase 2, but it didn't really help the Harley Davidsons charge fast because they need phase 3. But there is an infrastructure there now if anybody wants to do it, and we were super keen to be able to leave something behind that might be useful for people. But when you looked at when cars first came out and horses, and people said that cars would never replace the horse, and people were very, very against it, and quite rightly, because you get in a car and you'd leave your house to go 40 miles down the road, you take your petrol, your fuel, gasoline with you, and then you would get there and you would hope that there was gas when you got there, because I mean, certainly here, I don't know about in the States, but when gasoline first came out here, you could only buy it in a chemist. Mm-hmm. and it wasn't very, and then now you look at it and every street corner has a gas station.
Sure.
And the same thing is more or less happening now. So I think it's very new technology. No one had really done it before, in the way that we did it. And so of course, when you're doing things that not many people have done, then that there are problems. But I mean, on the positive side, there is electricity everywhere in the world. So in actual fact, plugging in wasn't really an issue, and you could plug in at night and wake up the next morning and off you go again. But it certainly created a different story, a different vibe, a different feel. One of the most interesting things about it was that I remember when we were in the Pampas in Patagonia in Argentina, and you and I pulled up by this whole herd of llamas, and they were just looking at us, and because we hadn't really made any noise, they weren't worried about it, and so we just sort of sat, and we all the 8 of us were just all looking at each other, and they're very beautiful animals. They got big eyes and big eyelashes and these pretty heads, and they were just sort of looking at us, and we were sort of looking at them, and so you get a different vibe to them, so it's interesting.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about is the idea that there's no motor noise, and that you don't have to shout over that. You can hear people talking, you can hear the wildlife. It's such an incredible shift. And I think, the first 3 episodes did a really good job of communicating you guys wrangling with learning how to ride the bikes from a battery perspective. I think I remember in one of the first couple episodes, maybe it was the second episode, you guys actually had to bring in a diesel generator because you were learning. And then it became, hey, can we plug in, and we're tripping a circuit or whatever. There were those moments that I've seen as well. So that's a little bit of kind of interfacing with the culture.
I think that's life at the moment when you're in places which are so super remote. You're like, if you go to the Caribbean, and you stay in one of these little islands in a beautiful hotel and stuff like that, that's run by diesel generators, and so occasionally you kind of you have to do it. We tried desperately hard not to. I mean, I think one of the lovely things I remember when we got up to Central America, and which is in an episode coming soon.
Yes.
And you know, we came across this solar farm, and in Costa Rica, you know, the first light bulb that was ever turned on was renewable energy, and 95% of the country is run on renewable energy, and they have no military, so all the money they spend on that you would spend on the military, they spend on renewable energy, education, infrastructure, and all that kind of stuff. So we went to this solar panel, and I had no idea how a solar farm worked. I had no idea. I mean, I know the principle of it,
Sure.
but anyway, so we turned up at this place. They said, yeah, come in, and they were, because people always laugh. So when you turn up and you say, oh, we're doing this trip, and they go, oh, that's great, and they go, oh, and we're doing it on electric bikes, and they go, wow, electric bikes, and you go, yeah, and they're Harley Davidsons, and people go, what? So it's quite funny to see people's reactions. But we got these guys, and they said, yeah, come on in, and we'll show you around, and they showed us around, and we said, would you mind if we plugged in while you show us around the solar farm? So we said, yeah, no problem. So essentially, of course, with a bit of technology, we were basically plugging into their wall, basically plugging into the sun, and while we were there for a couple of hours, they gave us, I don't know how many percent in the bike, and we learned about how they capture all those beautiful sun rays, and then off we went again, and it was a lovely feeling to be able to sort of, they sometimes call it in when you're diving in on the barrier reef and on reefs and stuff like that, they always say, just don't take coral, just leave bubbles.
That's right.
And that's sort of what we were doing. We were sort of having this adventure, but not leaving anything behind.
Long term, I think that will end up evolving, being the legacy of Long Way Up, for sure. You know, the people, the footprint changes completely.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and you know, it was interesting. It was complicated. Charging every day, and you didn't quite get the freedom that you would have if you had a big tank of gas and you could sort of stop wherever you want and stuff like that. But it was different because you were relying on people. You were relying on people's kindness and generosity to plug into their houses, and not just plugging your motorbike into their houses, but you were really plugging into them, and you, in businesses and restaurants and campsites and in youth hostels or B&Bs, wherever it was, you had to have this lovely interaction with everybody to explain what you were doing, and that actually, by plugging in, it wasn't very expensive, which it isn't, and it's quite cheap to run. Of course, we always offered to make sure that we paid for our electricity. So you have a totally different experience, because you're meeting people that you would never meet. You're being introduced to businesses and to places that you would never normally go to because you would be on a combustion engine. So it really did made a difference, and it was nice.
That's the common thread, I think, with the Long Way series is, it's the motorcycles, it's the cultures that you interface with, but throughout all of the series, it's you guys connecting with the locals. And really, when you think about adventure travel, especially on a motorcycle, because it makes so many things accessible. I mean, even, you could be doing here in the United States, the Sierra Nevadas. There's still an opportunity to kind of capture that spirit, like, hey, a hamburger stand in the middle of nowhere, that type of a thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think for the long ways, we were very conscious of not wanting to make it, bike centric.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to do it like everybody else does it. You get a bunch of people who do it on motorcycles. You get a bunch of people who do it on bicycles, in buses, trains, hitching rides. However they want to do it, and I think, and hopefully, when people watch it who travel and who like to travel, all you all have common experiences, bumping into people. And for instance, we bumped into these people. We were struggling to find a charge. We stopped at this shop. This was this was episode 4, I think, or 5. I can't remember now. And we were struggling to find, and we plugged into this. We saw this. We came to a really nice town for the first time in ages, and we were cruising, and we saw a really nice restaurant, and we thought, you know what, let's plug in. We need to plug in for a couple of hours. Let's plug in. Let's have a really nice meal. And, you know, we can charge at the same time. So every time we plugged in, we kept plunging this hotel
Hmm.
into darkness. So that was out the window. So then we thought, okay, we'll go to a campsite, because campsites usually have strong power. So we ended this campsite, and we ended up meeting this couple who were traveling around as well. And he was from Eastern Europe, and she was from Turkey.
Was this the one
And
where she hadn't told her parents that this was what
yes,
she was
hadn't told
doing?
her parents. And we had the most wonderful conversation with them, and then it turns out that they'd fallen in love. He went off and came back, couldn't live without her. She
Yep.
couldn't live without him. She then told her father that she was going to Istanbul to teach kids, and
She's on a
she's
bicycle in
in
South
South
America.
America, having traveled all around the world, you know. And he's thinking she's been a good girl and teaching kids in Istanbul. And we were laughing because you know, and I was going, what your father doesn't know. And anyway, the episode came out, and I'm just still praying and hoping that he hasn't seen the episode, and sort of suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, that's my daughter in
Yeah,
there.
that's your
You know?
daughter.
So,
She's not where she said she
but
is.
you know what's lovely about that is that she comes from a country where she's expected to do whatever.
Sure.
And she's traveled around. She's traveled around. She's fallen in love with somebody, and they're totally in love with each other. And they've gone up and they've lived their life, and that's what you should do. You've got to go and live your life, and you know, as long as you're not you know,
Harming
destroying
people, or
anybody
yeah,
else's,
sure.
or
Yeah.
working, but go and live your life. And that was such a positive um, uh, experience and life story. It was so lovely to see, and she kept just going on about his eyes and just saying how beautiful he was. And
And
I
it
felt
came through on the
so,
screen though.
yeah, for
It
sure.
just really came through in that episode. That was a very poignant part of that episode.
Yeah, I love that. And that's what, you know, and I think everybody who's traveled a little bit identifies with that. And that, you know,
Sure.
and often we're told in the first world, we're told that these other countries are, because they don't live like we do, that they're no good, you know. But that's just rubbish. They are wonderful, and every culture and every country, regardless of if they're struggling or not, have incredible cultures and a couple of ways of living. And it's not wrong, it's not right, it's just different. And you know, we will need to respect that.
And there's the Twain quote, right? Travel is absolutely fatal to prejudice.
Yeah,
And I think,
absolutely.
and that you know, that shines through in you guys being able to connect with perfect strangers. You know, hey,
Yeah.
can
And
I plug in? Can you imagine somebody just pulling up and
yeah.
saying, I need to plug in?
Oh no. Yeah, exactly. And just want to say, it's nice because of the way the world is at the moment. It's nice to be able to come up through South America and Central America and
Sure.
Mexico and show people how wonderful and kind and generous people are. And you know, I've traveled, and you and I have traveled a lot, and I'm sure
Hmm.
you have as well, traveled around the world. And you know, one, it is the spice of life, and you need to see other cultures. And 99% of people are really, really nice people. And usually it's the governments of those countries that usually mess it up.
Well, listen, you know that I'm excited to watch more episodes. You know, I'm
Yeah.
caught up. I'm current. You know, this one is absolutely living up to the other episodes. And you know, one of the other series. I apologize. You know, it's always fascinating. It's actually great. It's family time. You know, exactly as you say, you're looking into other cultures, and
Yeah.
you're kind of adapting to that. One of the things that I wanted to ask about for our audiences, I know for a fact well, I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty positive that maybe whiskey played a little bit of a role in Long Way Around. And this may have been the Red Devil motorcycle that Claudio was on when you guys were on the side of the
Oh,
road, and those guys showed up and they were laughing at you because you couldn't fix your motorcycle with your modern tools, and they
oh yeah,
fixed your
all the
motorcycle.
tools and no idea.
But I think at the end of the day, once they fixed the motorcycle, I think some whiskey exchanged hands.
Yeah.
Is that the case? And what other stories may you have from the road that may involve whiskey?
Well, I think you know, when we first did this trip, you know, we were told a few things. Always have a pack of cigarettes and stuff just for something to barter with. And then I remember, I can't remember where it was, but I picked up this idea that what you do is you bring along those little bottles that you get on an airplane, or do you remember when we used to fly? Do you remember that? and all those months ago.
Yes.
Well, you get those little whiskey bottles, and Johnny Walker or any any of the ones that you see around that are, the popular brands,
Sure.
and Jack Daniels, or that kind of thing, and they're really easy to put in a bag. You can put 6 or 7 or 10 of them in a bag, and then when you're at a border, or you're meeting people, or you want to give people a gift, you give them these little bottles, and you don't see them that often in around the world, these little bottles, and they're great commodity to trade and friendship. And I remember we're in the middle of Mongolia, in the middle of nowhere, and we're just sitting around this little campfire, and we just passed this little bottle around. Not only were they, it was, I think it was Black Label Johnny Walker, I think was what it was, and they loved the whiskey anyway, but the size of the bottle just blew their mind. It was like, it comes like this.
Yes, it comes.
Yeah. So that was always good, and so if you do travel, when we're allowed out again and stuff like that, and you travel, then definitely always have a few of those in the bottom of your bag. It's a must have. But having said that about travel and stuff like that, is that we've got this saying now, which I'm sure is happening the same, is this whole thing called this staycation. So you're now suddenly you're looking at the United States, or you're looking at Cornwall and Scotland and Wales and all these places, and thinking, well, actually, hang on a minute, there's some really nice places to travel to and beautiful roads to travel to. So suddenly, and to have an adventure, you don't need to go for 3 months or 100 days in 13 countries and stick on the back of an electric motorcycle. You can, just going out your back door for a Saturday ride, or staying overnight somewhere, or whatever, is just as much, and just as much can happen in 24 hours as 100 days. So it's
the Saturday rides.
A good trip.
Yeah, the Saturday rides has been what's keeping me sane during this time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I totally agree.
And that lovely movie, On Any Sunday, that kind of depicts the whole thing about what someone does on a Sunday. You go out and you go racing in the desert, or you go out and meet your mates, or you go and because you can socially distance happily on motorbikes and still have a wonderful experience.
Absolutely.
So I think I think drink always sort of comes into it, and then I didn't have a great experience of tequila, but traveling into Mexico, you can't miss it. I mean, and every little town and village has one of these little rollers, these wooden rollers which roll the cactus and squash it down to make like you would with with flour or something.
It's a mill, yeah.
The mill. That's it.
Yep.
But so that was interesting, and every country has their version of whiskey, which is really interesting. So Mexico have theirs. In Brazil, you have cachaça, which is made out of sugar cane. In Ireland, we have pochine, which was made out of potatoes. So we all have that. It's a bit like grits. In North America, we call it grits. In African countries, we call it pap or mili mile. And in France, in Italy, we call it polenta because it's very posh. So we all these countries have their own whiskeys and their own, which is always so nice,
So allegedly, in doing some research, you are a fan of whiskey. I understand you grew up in Ireland. So tell me about it. Tell me about,
Well, in Ireland, sorry. Well, in Ireland, when I was growing up there, my father's, we've been living there for about 50 years, and my father still lives there. My father is a film director, and he directed films like Deliverance and Excalibur and Hope and Glory and Emerald Forest and lots of movies. And so we had this most charmed upbringing. So we would live in Ireland for 2 or 3 years. My father would get a movie off the ground, and we'd go off for a year, depending where it was, and then always coming back to Ireland. And when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, the whole culture was to go to the pub. So you go to the pub from live music. The whole families would go to the pub on Sundays and stuff like that. And of course, Ireland invented whiskey, and I know that lots of countries, vehemently disagree with that. But and so as a kid, you grew up with whiskey, so you would have Guinness and a little whiskey chaser, and that's how it was. I remember one time there's a very famous place called Kitty O'Shea's, which is a live band place. It's very popular with tourists now as well. But years and years ago, it's where good bands, the Chieftains and lots of other bands would go and play.
Nice.
And I remember, well, I don't really remember that much of it, but I remember ending up dancing on the table with not very much on, and then I remember being thrown out of Kitty O'Shea's, and then my clothes came out afterwards, and then I think it was Brian who was out there, and he said to me, "Rick, Charlie, you're banned until tomorrow," right? And I looked at my watch, and it had just turned 12. So I got dressed and went back in.
Get back in?
And he gave me a pint and a little whiskey, and I carried on.
Everything about that story. I've never taken my
clothes off since.
Everything about that story is great. From the name of the pub, from the fact that you got thrown out and then you went right back in, and it also involves whiskey. That's awesome. I've written before about the idea that whiskey is a sensory experience, right? You could be in a tent in the middle of nowhere, freezing, and somebody could have the worst whiskey on the planet. But in that moment, when you're drinking that whiskey, it could be the best tasting thing that you've ever had.
Sure.
So circumstances matter. If you've ridden, a few hundred miles and, whatever it is that you happen to have in a flask or in a bottle, it's going to affect how you perceive the taste or the experience. To your point, going and experiencing things, in individual places. You could be in Mexico and you could be like, "Oh my God, this is the best tequila that I've ever had in my life," and then you get home and you have a drink of it, and you wake up 4 days later and you don't know what happened, right? It's kind of like, how does that work?
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's a bit like when you go to Spain and you fall in love with sangria, and then
yep.
And then you come home and you bring it back with you, and you make it at home, and it just
doesn't taste the same.
Taste the same. And I think some whiskeys are definitely like that. I think sometimes you're sitting out there in the freezing cold. You've had a huge thing, climbed a mountain, or you've done something. You're sitting at having topped a mountain or climbed the peak. And I remember when I was in Canada, I can't remember the name of the mountain now. But it was my first proper mountain that I'd ever climbed, and we sat at the top, looking down at the Rockies. You could just see them stretching in front of you. I can't remember, 3,500 meters.
Jeez.
Or something like that. And I remember the guy I was climbing with, he just passed me this little flask, and I just had a nip of whiskey, and I don't know what it was, but it tasted fantastic.
Was the best whiskey that you probably ever had at that moment. Yep.
Yeah. 100%. I don't think I've ever had a better swig of whiskey than that.
Are you partial, end of the day at home, are you partial to any kind of whiskey?
I like a peaty sort of whiskey is what I like. And I don't know if that's just my sort of Irish kind of upbringing, but I like a Talisk or a nice like that. So I will drink a Scottish whiskey occasionally, but But yeah, that's the kind of more flavors I like. I like that kind of oaky, burnt, kind of peaty kind of taste. That's more where I am. But then, you know, so many. I mean, you look at whiskies in Japan and how far whiskies have come in Japan. I mean, they're now some of the best whiskies in the world. Whereas in back in the day, you know, you struggled to touch them. You know, now
Sure.
you struggle to afford them.
Sure. Absolutely. There's a lot of emerging markets. I mean, if you look at the product that's coming out of Australia, or if you look at the
Sure.
product that is even coming out of India, you know, it's definitely a whiskey revolution. Have you done much exploration around American bourbon?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think always whenever I'm traveling, if I'm in Australia or in North America or wherever it is, then I'll certainly sort of hunt out a local brew, if it were. And you know, in America, there's a lot of choice.
Hmm.
There was a guy. I do these motorcycle tours in Africa
Africa, yeah.
every year, and I go from Cape Town to Victoria Falls, and we go through South Africa and Namibia and all these things. And we get quite a few Americans coming on the tours, and a lot of them will bring their own bourbon or whatever along with them, and you know, each evening they'll come out with a bottle and give you what's that one? I can't remember the name of it now. Oh my god, it's a turkey honey mixed turkey,
Wild
uh,
turkey?
wild turkey,
Hmm.
and actually I'd heard about it, but I had never tasted it. And we would sit, and it was quite nice because we on these motorcycle tours that we do, we stay in these most incredible
Hmm.
hotels. I mean, in Africa, it seems to do some of the best hotels in the world that I've ever been to, and they really know a hotel. And you sit down on this your little hut with a thatched hut, and you're
Hmm.
looking out on
Hmm.
your little deck, and you're looking down at the watering hole, and there are 20 elephants and zebra and giraffe and eland and kudu and all those animals, and sitting there sipping a little bit of wild turkey and you know, it's not
I can't
bad.
think of anything better. One of your
He
trips is
said to me,
definitely.
Charlie, when we finish the tour, he said, I'll leave you the bottle. It
Was
was
there
a
anything
16-day
left?
tour, and at day 10 it was empty. So
One of your trips is definitely on my bucket list. So hopefully I get to make one of those.
yeah, one
You
day, they're
know,
lovely. Africa is an amazing place to travel. It's one of those very few places left in the world where you have to stop on a main road because, you know, 60 elephants are crossing the road.
sure,
It's
it's a
quite nice.
totally different. You know, you don't even think about stuff like that. Well, hopefully you can get back to America and do some more adventure travel here. You know, the Bourbon Trail and it.
The
Um,
Bourbon Trail, yeah, sounds good. You'll have to come along with me and show me the Bourbon
Sign
Trail,
me
and
up. I'll send
and
you my info. You
hopefully we can survive the trip.
don't drink and ride.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
for sure. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of your time, and I
Okay.
absolutely appreciate you taking the time to connect with our audience about Long Way Up and your adventures with whiskey. I wish you the best of luck. I look forward. I hope there isn't such a long time in between episodes, or we get to see more
Oh, I
of the
hope so.
team.
Hope so. We've spoken about it. We've spoken about, you know, we've often thought of the idea of long way down under, or you know, London to Sydney or something like that, or Scandinavia, long way Scandies. Might be
Oh,
nice. You never know.
the I look forward to that so much,
Okay.
and I think any one of those would be incredible.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much, and it was lovely talking to you guys, and it was just lovely to be able to reach out to everybody at the Whiskey Network.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Safe
All
travels
right.
to you.
Okay. Take care. Bye
Take
now.
care, Charlie.